This is Commissioner Reed. I will be chairing today in person. Commissioner Kelly is with us remotely. And today we're here for a work session. As a reminder for anybody in the room or listening online, we do not take public comment during this work session, nor is this an action item, as it is for informational purposes and opportunity for questions from commissioners. If you're listening and you have comment you'd like to make later, we will start our business meeting at 5:30, and there'll be an opportunity for general public comment at that time. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah to introduce our guests.
Thank you, commissioners. I'm actually going to let Chief Hardy do the introductions here in a minute, but I do want to really thank the LDCFM team for all the work that they put into this presentation. There's been a lot of discussion on it, and there's a lot of content. So commissioners, with your indulgence, we would really like to go all the way through the presentation before we take questions, just to make sure we get through all the material. I have promised that I will be giving John keys to keep it moving. Because it's a lot of material, and obviously we can come back and have additional conversation as we move through the budget process. So I'll turn it over to Chief Hardy.
Thank you, Sarah. Introductions. My name is Joe Hardy. I'm our acting fire chief with LDCFM. We've got John Darling, who is our EMS division chief. We've got Tyler Wade, who is our acting deputy chief. And then Mackenzie Ezel is our chief of staff. So thank you for having us here.
All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. And just as some housekeeping, I've never really had a problem talking too slow, but if I'm going too fast, let me know. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, but if I'm going too fast, let me know so we can make sure we're intelligible. So this presentation is basically going over 2026 budget. The outline for tonight's presentation, we're going to first talk just briefly about resource management, entering call types and critical tasks, and then examples of how that plays out in the real world with a few case studies. Then we'll move to talking about the 2026 budget, the initial options that were presented to the City Commission April 1st, the effects of some of the reductions from those options, and then some additional options that have been developed since that time. And then we'll talk about our current service levels, and then I'll close ideally with a lot of time for questions and discussion coming out of that. So jumping in, talking about resource management. So obviously we're in the business of responding to emergencies. Typically the way emergency gets reported is someone picks up the phone and calls 911. The call taker at the Emergency Communications Center will take the information that's reported by that caller and categorize it into one of about 80 different call types that have been created for the different types of emergencies that we could respond to. That's things like a power line down or a stroke or a motor vehicle accident. So each call type that we've created has critical tasks associated with it that we have to perform in order to mitigate that type of emergency. And the critical tasks for each call type determine the resources that we send to each emergency, both personnel and equipment. This type of emergency might require 4 people. This type of emergency might require 6 people, but we also have to have an ambulance to transport, or we might have to have a specific type of equipment on a fire apparatus. So that's why we've built these, is so we make sure we get the resources that we need for each call type. So for some examples of what those critical tasks look like, for a cardiac arrest, we need someone to serve as the lead paramedic, someone to serve as the driver, someone to do chest compressions, someone to handle airway and ventilation, someone to handle IV access and medications, actually 2 people for that, and then 1 person in command. So that's a total of 7 people. So the way that we achieve that is the resource we send is 1 ambulance and 1 fire apparatus and 1 battalion chief within the city. In the county, we don't necessarily send an LDCFM unit, but we will request or have the county agencies respond. And if we don't get the number of people coming that we will need, we will request an additional ambulance to respond to. Because a big key thing throughout this entire presentation is that the resources may vary. The number of critical tasks we have to accomplish remains the same. So we have to meet that demand no matter what our resources are. So we just have different ways of doing that. So another example of that is our MVA level 1. That's basically the most serious motor vehicle accident. And that's where, we have reports to the call taker of potentially multiple victims, people trapped or impined, people with severe traumatic injuries. And so for that, we're not sending just a single unit. We're sending 2 lead paramedics, 2 drivers, 4 additional ALS personnel, 3 people to do extrication, and 1 person to serve as command, for a total of 12 personnel. And the way we achieve that is through sending 2 ambulances, a fire apparatus, Ladder 5, which provides technical rescue services throughout the county, and a battalion chief to serve that command function. And that's how we get to those 12 personnel. So That's how we respond to single emergencies, but we are also responsible for all of the emergencies in Douglas County at any given time. So we talk about system status. We dispatch the closest units to every emergency that are appropriate for that call type. There's no point, if we need to take someone to the hospital, we need to send an ambulance, obviously not a fire truck. We may send a fire truck as well to help. And we also respond outside of the normal demand zone to wherever the demand is based on that. And so what we call system status is the number of units that remain available for emergency response at any one given time. And our term status zero means we have no units left available. So as we move through this, I'm going to show you now a few case studies that all happened this year. These are not hypotheticals. This is real calls that happen in real time. Kind of walk through how our system responds to these emergencies. So the first one is January 24th of this year. 1 in the afternoon, Medic 2 was responding to an MVA level 3. That's the lowest acuity MVA, which gets a single ambulance. So that's the only type of emergency going on at 1 p.m. We have a single truck out. The other 6 ambulances and fire apparatus are available. Now, at 1:02, Medic 3 and Quint 3 get sent to a stroke. And so you see you've got the system status board down there. The lights turn from green to red as they ambulances go available and not available. A few minutes later at 1:10, Medic 1 and Engine 1 get dispatched for chest pain. 2 minutes after that, they determine that the chest pain is non-cardiac in nature, so Engine 1 reports available. Medic 1 stays on the call. At 1:14, Medic 3 is transporting Quint 3 reports available. Medic 3 is transporting that patient to LMH. And at 1:20, Medic 2 is transporting. So this right now is sort of just a typical afternoon where we have, units running calls, they're reporting available after calls. And so we're kind of managing our system status. But at 1:29, a structure fire level 1 comes in. That's the most severe structure fire. That's where there's, a confirmed working fire potential that we could have occupants we need to rescue with severe medical issues. So we send a lot of resources to those. So we dispatch Engine 1, Quint 3, Medic 4, Engine 5, Ladder 5, Medic 5, Battalion 1, and Battalion 2 to that. And at 1:31, 2 minutes later, Medic 1 reports available from that chest pain. And because they're close, they add themselves to that call to try to get those units on scene as quickly as possible because it's a very time critical incident. So at 1:32, Medic 12 and Engine 4 get dispatched for a stroke in Southwest Lawrence. So that's the unit that's normally stationed at your door is now responding into Southwest Lawrence because that's the closest unit available. And that leaves us with 1 ambulance left in the system, Medic 11 down in Baldwin. At 1:32, Medic 3 goes available from the hospital where they'd taken the patient and is adding themselves to the fire. And at 1:36, Medic 11 and Quint 2 get sent to a fall. So at this point, we're at status zero. We have no fire trucks. We have no ambulances for the next emergency that comes in until one of these units becomes available. And sure enough, at 1:41, we have a fire alarm, and the only person available was actually responders, our prevention lieutenant in a staff vehicle. What turned out it wasn't an actual fire, but we had water flow, and nobody at the scene knew how to shut it off. So if that person hadn't been there, we would have had a lot more property damage from that. That same time, we break Medic 4 available from the fire. Medic 2 goes available also at the hospital. So now we have 2 ambulances available because all of our people know we have to get units available because help is 30 to 45 minutes away if we do mutual aid request, if we call back. So we have to get these people available. Unfortunately, Medic 4 gets dispatched to abdominal pain, and then Medic 2 gets dispatched to a sick person. So this is twice that we've been at status zero. After this, the calls do stop coming in quite as fast. We're able to break more units available. We don't hit status zero again that day. But the point is, at 1 p.m., we had 1 of our ambulances committed. 45 minutes later, we have nothing left in the tank. And this is something that we live in continuously. So obviously, structure fires are very resource intensive, but that's not the only time that we find that situation happening. So April 17th of this year, it's 7:45 at night. Medic 1 is on an emergency transfer to Stormont Vale. Medic 11 is transporting a patient from Baldwin City to LMH. We have 5 ambulances available. At 1:46, Medic 5 and Engine 5 get dispatched for heart problems. At 8 p.m., Medic 4 gets dispatched for a sick person. And at 8:01, Medic 3 and Ladder 5 get sent for breathing problems. So now we're down to Medic 2 and Medic 12 in the system. At that same time, Medic 2 gets dispatched on a medical alarm. They send Medic 12 on a move up to Station 2 because we try to, basically put units in the center of the county where they can respond to wherever the emergency may come from. So at 8:06, Medic 5 is transporting Engine 5 reports available. And at 8:09, Medic 1 reports available from that transfer. They report available the minute they hit the county line so they can respond to emergencies. Because now we're down to Medic 11 and Medic 1 and Medic 12. But we're not done because that same minute, Medic 1 and Quint 3 get dispatched to a motor vehicle accident. So now Medic 1, the unit that's normally downtown, is responding way out to Northwest Lawrence. At 8:13, Medic 11 finally arrives at LMH for the transfer from Baldwin because those do take a long time. And at 8:15, Medic 12 gets dispatched for an unknown medical from their move up alarm. So at this point, we're at status 0. At 7:45, we had 2 ambulances committed, 5 available. Half an hour later, we have no ambulances left in the county. At 8:16, Medic 2 reports available. But then a minute later, at 8:17, they get sent to a fall. And at 8:18, Engine 5 gets dispatched for a lift assist. So here you have Medic 2, which is normally at 23rd and Harper, is responding to the northwest side of the city. You have Engine 5, which is normally 19th and I, responding northwest. Units are moving around as best we can to try to cover the demand because we're running out of trucks. And then at 8:19, Quint 2 gets added to Medic 12's call because that unknown medical turned out to be a critical cardiac patient. So then here we are. Not only do we not have any ambulances again, we're down to 1 fire apparatus in the entire county or in the city. So that's how these things happen when we don't have a structure fire, just normal demand. Another example of that is May 4th of this year. It's 1:50 in the morning. Medic 4 is transporting a patient to OPR as an emergency transfer, and Medic 11 is transporting a patient to Ransom down in Ottawa. We do try to accommodate patient requests to go to their hospital where their physicians are normally at if we can. And at this point, hey, there's only one other call in the system, so we'll go ahead and accommodate that request. But at 1:52 a.m., Medic 3 and Quint 3 get dispatched for an unconscious patient. At 2 p.m., right as the bars are closing, Medic 1 and Engine 1 get dispatched for an assault in downtown Lawrence. And at 2:01, Medic 5 and Engine 4 get requested for a standby by law enforcement. And at 2:03, Engine 1 clears the first assault and responds to another assault in downtown Lawrence with Medic 2. And at 2:07, Medic 5 and Engine 4 report available, which is good because if law enforcement hadn't released them, when Medic 12 got dispatched to this MVA level 3 at 2:10, we would not have had an ambulance in the system. So after this, it starts to cool down for a little bit because we have Medic 3 and Quint 3 report available. Medic 1's transporting to LMH, so we know that they're going to be reported available soon. Medic 12 is reported available, and Medic 2 is transporting Engine 1's available. And so at 2:30, Medic 1's available. So now we're back to having 4 ambulances in the system. But as soon as we get them back, we start losing them again. At 2:30 a.m., Medic 3 and Quint 3 get sent to a sick person. Medic 12 gets requested back to that MVA level 3 by law enforcement. Medic 5 responds all the way out north of Clinton Lake for breathing problems, and we're down to Medic 11 in Baldwin City being the only unit left in the county. So there's lots more examples like this, but these are just some from recent years to show kind of how the demand is affecting our system. So now we want to talk about budget options. So as a refresher, our operating budget is really 3 different buckets. There's the LFD bucket, which is for fire-only expenses, the DC EMS bucket, which is EMS-only expenses, and the shared bucket, which is by far the largest part of our operating costs. So Douglas County funds 100% of the DC EMS budget and 36% of the shared bucket. The city of Lawrence pays 100% of the LFD bucket and 64% of the shared bucket. So this year, with a known shortfall, the city directed LDCFM to come up with a proposal that would reduce their city's contribution to our shared expenses by $1.5 to $1.9 million. Now, you don't get there with keeping the same number of resources on the street. So we had to look at changing how we deployed our resources. As we looked at changing resource deployments, we started by using the same methodology that had been used for the current EMS agreement to recalculate what the shared expenses were if we use that same methodology. And what I mean by that is under our current deployment here in 2025, we have 25 personnel on fire apparatus every day and 14 personnel on ambulances every day. So that's a total of 39 people. 25 out of 39 is 64%. So that's where that 64% from the city comes from. And 14 out of 39 is 36%, which is where that 36% ratio comes from. So when we looked at the changes for what we were called option 1 that we presented to the commission on April 1st, we had changed our deployment so that we had 22 personnel on fire apparatus and 16 personnel on ambulances And using that methodology, it would have been a 58-42% split. If we did that, the impact would be that the city would meet its target reduction of 1.8 million, but it would require an increased contribution from the county of $1.6 million. So to be clear, that is not something that the county is required to do by following that methodology. That's not a requirement. That's just one of the options. And so the next option that we presented to the city commission on April 1st was if we didn't do anything with the county contribution, where we kept the shared expense percentage the same, and we didn't have any also just, transfers of funds. And this is the option that is pulled up here, and it's called the green option. So what we want to see here is we have listed over here on the left changes from the 2025 service levels listed. The column next to that lists the total change. So for example, this first one, reducing 3 battalion chief positions, has a total impact of $633,000. Now since that's a shared expense, 64% of that 633 is 405, which is the city's impact. And so 36% of that 633 is 227. So that's the approach that we take all the way down. And then reducing those 3 positions in this last column lists the number of FTE positions that would be reduced. So what you see is that in this, in this option, the city would meet its target of a reduction of a $1.7 million reduction. The counties would also have almost an $800,000 reduction in the amount it would have to contribute to shared expenses, which would mean the total change in LDCFM budget would be 2.6 million, and it'd be a reduction of 18 FTEs. So we want to talk about what are the implications of making these changes in the surface levels one at a time. The first was reducing 3 battalion chiefs. This is going to have a big impact on both our fire and EMS service levels. We only have 2 BCs per shift. That would double their workload on the remaining battalion chiefs. With that doubled workload, that's going to reduce their ability to provide command presence, which is, the mentoring, the in-station supervision, the succession planning, all the things that they're needed for. More importantly, operationally, we would lose a dedicated safety officer. If you remember from when we showed the example of the structure fire in January, we have both battalion chiefs respond. The first battalion chief to arrive on scene is the incident command. They stay in the command vehicle, maintain command presence, and manage the incident. The second battalion chief to arrive on scene is the dedicated safety officer who is ensuring safe operations, not just for our personnel, but for the people that we're helping. That person would no longer exist under this reduction. And we'd have to find different ways to try to do these things. Another big issue with this is with 2 battalion chiefs, assuming we don't have a working structure for our other supercritical incident going on, if there is a high acuity incident in the county, things like large grass fires, MBA level 1, technical rescue incidents, lots of other things, we send a battalion chief. Same way like we talked about the cardiac arrest, we typically send a battalion chief. If we only have 1 instead of 2, that means we don't have 1 back in the city. It's going to be harder to send 1 out, and it's going to be less likely that we're going to be able to use these personnel to respond to emergencies that are outside of the city of Lawrence. The next one is shutting down the engine 5 and upstaffing ladder 5. This does impact both fire and EMS service levels because ALS providers are on engine 5. And when we talk about response times, when an ALS unit like engine 5 arrives on scene, that will stop the clock. More importantly, it's a loss of 1 of our 6 staffed fire apparatus. And so what that's going to mean is when we have our level 1 structure fire, we typically send 4 of our 6 units to that. Now we'll have to send 4 of our 5, leaving 1 in reserve. Where that's going to show is that we're going to have an increase in mutual aid requests. And because those are requests, it's not always guaranteed we're going to be able to get that additional resources. And also, fair is fair. When we are requesting mutual aid, other places also expect us to be able to send a truck in return. We will have less resources to send. But another big impact to this is we have Station 5 currently as a dual station, Engine 5 and Ladder 5. We try to protect the engine, to protect the ladder, and have the engine respond to a lot of the EMS calls because the ladder is a dedicated unit for technical rescue that we send throughout the county. Without Engine 5, we're going to have less ability to do that because Ladder 5 is also going to be committed to all the other calls that a standard engine company will run. Prevention lieutenant primarily impacts fire service levels. It does affect our ability to perform community risk reduction. It can delay construction projects, plan review and inspections, reduce inspections of target hazards. And as we saw in that incident from January, when there was no one else available, that's who responded to the fire alarm and stopped the loss there. The training lieutenant does have a big impact on fire and EMS service levels. We really have our training division has a captain, lieutenant, and a chief. And the training lieutenant is heavily involved in the EMS training that we provide. So we have less quantity and quality of EMS training hours that we provide. And that's going to affect not just LDCFM, but also our Douglas County first responders. So we are working to try to come up with plans to facilitate additional CEs for them and develop that program. Also, as we find issues and opportunities for improvement within our protocols, a big component of that is training. Losing that person will lose the ability to adapt these as quickly. Another big one is the conversion of a 24-hour ambulance to a 40-hour ambulance. That's going to, in fact, fire and EMS service levels. So basically what that means is that an ambulance that's currently staffed 24/7 would only be staffed 40 hours a week. So that's a reduction from 168 hours to 40 hours a week, means it's staffed less than 25% of the time, and it eliminates 4 FTE positions. And so if we take one of those ambulances out 75% of the time, how much more often are we at or near exhaustion levels in a system that's already struggling to keep up with demand? And so also another thing with that is, if you notice, like one of those case studies, I think was at 1 p.m., one was at 9 p.m., and one was at 2 a.m. You can't have an 8-hour truck that covers all of those demand times. So we're still going to have this issue. So based on those impacts, after that initial meeting we had here, we worked with city staff, county staff to develop some additional budget options. Basically, and all of these are sort of structured where we started with that second option, the green chart that I showed, as like a baseline, and then sort of started adding back services. And the way that we did that was not by specific dollar amounts, but by changing the shared expense ratio to make it clean.
And if I could, I know I said don't interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you. And these additional budget options were really at my request, based off of our conversation about how do we maintain service. As the commissioners are aware, as I work to develop the proposed budget, I'm working to try to maintain service levels inside existing funding available. So that's kind of the rationale I use for the development of it. So both of the two options that were previously shared didn't do that. So that's what we were trying to see how we can maintain EMS service.
Okay, so I'll show you. That's quite crazy on me. Okay, so the first option, all we're doing in this one that's different is we're keeping that ambulance that was being turned from a 24-hour truck into a 40-hour truck. We're keeping it as a 24-hour truck. So if we change the shared expense from 6436 to 6337, that maintains that. That has a net effect of changing the shared expenses by going from 6436 to 6337 would mean that it's a net shift of 277,000, and the city would still be in its target. The county would still be spending less than in 2025, but instead of being 800,000, almost 900,000, it'd be 445,000. And it's a net reduction of 14 FTEs. And I'll circle back to all these at the end. I'm just going to try to get through them. The second option is saying, hey, we recognize that EMS is not just the ambulances, but it's all the support infrastructure that goes into that. So if we wanted to maintain all of the current resources we have for EMS, that would be maintaining the battalion chiefs and the training lieutenant as well. So the second option, the gray option, still has the engine shut down and upstaffing ladder, still eliminates the prevention lieutenant, but it keeps the 6 battalion chiefs, the training lieutenant, and all of our all 7 current ambulances fully staffed. And if we do that and change the shared expense ratio to 61.75% and 38.25%, the city still makes its target, and the county would have an additional contribution of $183,000. And we'd still see a net reduction of 10 FTEs. The last option is if we say, look, we have a certain expectation of the service levels in terms of times that we want to make, and we realize the system's at or near exhaustion levels, and we want to, and the county commission wanted to look at adding an expansion ambulance in order to meet the demand of the increasing call volume. What that would look like is we'd have to put the shared expense ratio at 59.5%. and 40.5%, which is meets the city's requirements, is an additional 1.1 million from the county, and that would still be a reduction for us of 2 FTEs. And so, that is a lot. That is also significantly less than the initial preferred option that was presented, which was like 1.5 or 1.6 million more from the county. So we're working to try to kind of like strategize within this. So that's sort of the options that we've been created. Now, just briefly talking about service levels, we did talk about this, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it. But remember, we are having increased travel time in rural areas, and it's increased by more than 2 minutes overall from 2020 to 2024. And again, that's only calls that we went lights and sirens the entire way. And the big thing there is that our travel time growth was not evenly distributed because while it's gone up by 2 minutes globally, the reality is that in large portions of the county, it's been, well, maybe not at our benchmarks, it's been relatively stable. The one area I'd like to call out particular is demand zones DG3, DG4, and DG5, which are highlighted here. So, again, the map color matches the line color on the graph. And what you see is in all of these areas, in DG3 and in DG5, 4 years ago, our travel times were about 16 minutes. Now they're north of 20. So that's a 4-minute increase over the past 4 years. And DG4 started higher because just of the geography in it, and it also has lower demand, but it's also had an increase of about 2 minutes in that 4-year period. So we're having, so our service, so the same number of resources are not providing the same service because of increased demand. The next one is urban, where we've had about a 2-minute increase. Again, that's not evenly distributed because when we look at the city as a whole, we have about 40 seconds to about a minute in 4 of the 5 demand zones in the city of Lawrence. The one where we see the greatest demand, though, this huge spike, is demand zone 1, where we've gone up by over 2.5 minutes. Actually, I'm sorry, about 3 minutes since 2020, just due to the increasing call volume. That's, if you figure each area should have about 20% of the calls it's the city is divided into 5 demand zones. This one has about 1.5 times as many as some of the others do. So in conclusion, key points from this presentation is that our units are assigned to incidents based on call type and critical tasks. And those critical tasks don't change based on the resources that we have. We still have to accomplish the same thing. We just have to figure out different ways to do it. And our current resources are increasingly at or near exhaustion levels, as we see from the case studies. Our response times are getting longer, much longer in some areas, and most of our budget scenarios do have fewer resources for us in 2026 than they had in 2025. So again, this is not something that's new. We've had the issue identified that we needed a Station 6 with includes Medic 6 since 2017. And I started in 2005 when we were running about 8,000 calls a year. We're now more than double that, and we've added 1 ambulance. So with that, I'm going to put up these 4 just to kind of review and open the floor for questions, comments, discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very well presented and efficient presentation. Thanks for such a quick download of a lot of information and for your work on coming up with these different scenarios. I'll go ahead and open it up to my fellow commissioners if anybody's got a question top of mind to start us off.
I have a few. So one would be, I know we have had mutual aid requests and those have been fulfilled sometimes for fire from outside organizations. Do we have a protocol for mutual aid for ambulances to come from outside Douglas County? And has that even happened?
We do have policies for kind of our drawdown deployment levels and what our trigger points for things like move ups for Medic 11 and Medic 12, and then also mutual aid. One issue we run into with that is, as you saw from our examples, that can happen so quickly that our operations chief officers, the 2 that are running the shift, don't believe that we have enough time to go ahead and call for mutual aid and bring them over into the county. Typically, they come from Johnson County, so that workflow takes some time before they actually get on the road. So one thing our operations chief do is kind of look at the status of the ambulances. If we know we have a couple transporting or at destination, for example, at the hospital, we'll make contact with them directly and try to get them back available as quickly as we can. So on the EMS side, us calling for mutual aid doesn't happen as frequently as it does for the fire side.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know we have it in the works to try and not be just requiring LDCFM to do non-emergency transport, to look at outside organizations that could do that. What kind of impact is that likely to have?
That will have some impact. So if I can go back one slide. So, if we are currently right around 18,000 calls a year. So we do about 1,000 to 1,100 total transfers per year, of which 700 to 800 are non-emergency transfers. So assuming we had flat growth, that would drop this curve slightly. It's not going to get us back down to 2017 levels. I mean, it will have an impact, absolutely. And because those transfers, especially the ones out of town, do take a significantly longer time than a transport inside town, but it's not going to, it will help. It's not alone probably going to get us to where we need to be.
I agree. I just was curious, like, how are we factoring that piece in terms of timed response because of how long it takes for those non-emergency transports?
When you look at your urban versus rural calls, do you know what that mix looks like for non-emergent and urgent? So do you have a fair amount of calls in the rural area that are non-emergent, that are more of your sick and your falls?
So,
Go ahead.
Sorry. So I believe Commissioner Willie was talking about was the non-emergency transfers. Those will only start at a hospital.
Okay.
We're going to continue to be the primary response agency for anyone who calls 911, just because you can't always rely on what's reported. We want to make sure that we have our personnel there to assess. Once they've been assessed by a physician, that's when we would bring in that third party. If the physician says, yes, I think this person is stable. Does that make sense? So the demand will only be coming from the hospital.
Okay, all right. And so then for your examples that you gave then, a fair amount of them, you have like sick person, breathing problems. Will you ever bring in any other outside agency that can then assist with any of your, no? With any of those non-emergent?
John Keynes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
There would be some, I mean, in terms of we can request mutual aid, and we have, and in times of high demand, we've had, Johnson County units come in and help, and we've sent units to other areas as well as mutual aid. In terms of like as a routine, having a second service also responding to 911 calls, I don't believe that's been
Yeah.
proposed, just because it gets really messy.
Yeah, I mean, it's outlined in code. It's prohibited to happen, and that's largely to make sure that we have trained advanced life support staff responding to incidences. And while now it looks like just a sick person time, it's hard to tell if that was a cardiac arrest or if that was a stomach flu.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. All right. So I wasn't sure if you were looking at any other possible best practices to support your work to actually basically support you triaging the patients that are actually calling in so that you could actually support your operations and maybe support your budget as well.
Commissioner Anderson, if I may, I might suggest a little bit of, this isn't exactly what you're asking about, but maybe a brief explanation of mobile integrated health and what that coming online has looked like, and sort of your way of deploying them when it is determined that it's no longer, that it's not an emergent call that needs an ambulance. That's not so specific to rural calls as you originally asked about, but maybe just a brief outline for newer commissioners about that program and how it is deployed by LDCFM.
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to both those. So taking the second one first, mobile integrated health, primarily, I mean, the task of that team has been assigned, find ways to reduce the number of EMS transports, the number of ED visits. And so some of that is, we hear a low acuity call, a call that sounds like low acuity, or someone that a patient we have past history with, that we know we can probably solve their problem without involving ambulance, we directly intervene. We don't do that all the time because we're also prioritizing the long-term interventions, where if they will like schedule interventions and services to get a patient, not just to stop this 911 call, but instead to stop 5, 6, 10 down the road. That's where I think we're getting the most bang for our buck. We are working to stand up an additional, the ability to, intermittently do alternative response as sort of a pilot. And as we see what kind of demand we have and how often we're able to do that, that may dictate applying additional resources to it. Because yes, that's a way more effective way of meeting these low acuity calls. The problem you run into is that, like for example, that in that one case study, Medic 12 got sent to an unknown medical, which turned out to be a code red cardiac. And that's where we want to make sure that we don't we think they're okay, self-reported, and then it turns out that we've left somebody who was really in need. And I think there was another.
I would add to, I think those alternative interventions like mobile integrated health are going to be important for LDCFM moving forward as we think about how to manage our growth. I do think it's important, though, the way our system is governed, those mobile integrated health assists the entire operations. It doesn't just assist medical. It assists all first responders. Currently, it is in the medical only bucket.
Okay.
I had a question. Do you have any kind of 5-year future forecast on calls? Would that be related to population growth or?
I mean, so yes, population growth usually predicts demand. Places with higher population do have higher demand. We see our past trends. We're kind of in a transitional period just with, like you mentioned, the mobile integrated health and then also non-emergency transfers. My hope is when we look at the shape of this curve where we've seen 5% call volume growth year over year since 2020, that we're able to bend that curve and maybe even bring it slightly down. What I would be surprised to do again is if we get down to the point where we're at the same demand we had in 2017, which is when we first started talking about the need for expansion ambulances. So,
I think that's as you move forward, you could probably do that for us as if we think about it in terms of governance, like as you're able to really figure out how many non-emergent transfers you're doing, you take that out of it and then you monitor the curve. I think that's something we could look at as we move into governance.
Well, the reason I asked that question is I think the intention is to negotiate another 5-year contract. Is it?
Another governance agreement, we haven't agreed to a term because the current one was 3 years. So it wasn't a 5-year agreement. Right.
Well, do you have a forecast for 3 years?
So we don't have a forecast. I do think that that's something that we can definitely do. We have our station optimization analysis that does take into account some things like population and building permits, historical demand, and things like that, that are more so incorporated into the documents to help us look at the graphs that are actually up on the screen right now, along with some of those other maps that we provide you to do more of like the analytics on. But as far as just forecasted things all put together.
Yeah, I know it's hard.
Can I ask about proposed Medic 6, which I do think it's a matter of time when that happens, because we know that the demand is there and that the need is there. But so within kind of looking at a 2026 budget, if there were to be a Medic 6 that were added within this budget cycle, where would it go? And that kind of determines costs also.
So Medic 6 obviously would help the entire system. When we talk about prime location, that's where we're looking at more conversations with Station 6 and our gap areas with that station optimization analysis. As far as if we put it in service today, where that would go, we do have base space where we use our reserve apparatus, or we keep our reserve apparatus. And so if one ambulance or one fire truck is in the city maintenance garage getting worked on, we have other apparatus that we use. We also use those additional ones for special events. Needless to say, we have units in stock that we can use that are currently stationed in stations. So we would just be able to staff up those different stations depending on, like, we could do a study of right now, where is it needed, and where do we have the space. So that would be any of our, really any of our fire medical stations. Our medical stations out in the county right now, Station 11 and then also Station 12. I don't believe that there's capacity for an extra unit out there. But I mean, we could get into really any any conversation, any creative conversation about, is it a floating ambulance where it's its home base? Does it really need to be, with the World Cup coming, should it be located out in the Northwest area? Just a variety of topics.
Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking, I mean, if you got, we call it station 1.5, the old ambulance station is one possibility, because it's not just adding space for the ambulance, but like, where's the residential space and where's the capacity for that? And I would think that not every station could take another number of FTEs that would cover that ambulance. When we did station optimization, it was kind of before we'd had kind of a larger discussion about response times by zone in the rural area. So this is kind of new information that I'm very glad to have it and glad to see it. It does seem pretty intuitive for kind of what the experience has been that northwest corner and northwest and southwest. The entirety of my district, I should say, really struggles with response time. So that's one gap to possibly fill if we were looking at a Medic 6. And then the other option is to look at call volume, which, we've got, Medic 1, which is doing more of the lion's share. So a lot of discussions that would come with that. My thought was, depending on where it goes, it'd probably be different costs. If we were talking about a 24/7 Medic 6. Another thing that's not on here that I think I can kind of ferret out through the numbers that we've got would be what would be the cost difference between a Medic 6 24/7 and a 40-hour a week. And I recognize that predicting those 40 hours is, what is the optimum time to have. If it's a part-time ambulance is not perfect. But I think whenever we go to a Station 6 or a Medic 6 addition, it would be nice to know like what are the costs with ramping that up as opposed to just pulling the trigger and going all the way to a fully, because then you don't have the residential part. You have some more flexibility to where it could go, those kinds of things. So I think I can probably ferret those numbers out. I just haven't yet.
Yep, and I believe we have those numbers as well that we can give to you after the fact. I do want to know, when we were talking about beds and spaces, so each of our stations do have additional bed space, bunk space, for if there's a big storm coming in and someone needs to come in the night before, there's space for them. We don't have a ton, but we have enough where staffing an extra ambulance would not be an issue for us. And then as far as station 1.5 that we call, which is on Mass Street, right now we have our prevention division there with the inspectors and inspectors. And then we also have our mobile integrated health team has set up their offices there as well. So station 1.5 is not the prime location at this point in time.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that it was used to that capacity. Another question, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd had any conversations with KU about the potential for increased calls coming from their convention center that's supposed to be opening in the fall. If you've got 500 people in there every other week, let's say, I bet you somebody has a problem occasionally.
Absolutely. And I don't think any representative from LDCFM has been involved in those conversations, Commissioner. I can't speak for city staff, specifically like the city manager's office, if they've had conversations with KU about that topic.
So that has not been built into any of the budget scenarios that have been presented? Okay, so those would for sure be increased cost, most likely moving forward. That
At this point in time, they're just going to be increased call volume
correct.
with
So
the
that would be
same
increased
resources.
cost.
So leading to longer wait times for response
Yes, and then increased cost moving down in the future,
eventually. Yeah.
eventually, correct.
But the
Yeah,
decide on how much we spend is up to the elected officials.
Yes, but you would have increased cost in the future. Okay.
I was curious about the training lieutenant or the training division. Is that handles both fire and EMS training? That's a completely shared position, is that right?
Yeah, it's a shared position. The issue is when you take away a significant portion of the workforce staff, we don't have as much staff time to do either function as well. And we've already kind of been struggling to meet the demand. We've had to scale back some of this training we do for the county, and we've been working on programs to try to build it back up. That change would kind of put us back, kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back again.
And I know what you mean, but maybe elaborate on that, the training that you do for the county, it's the training for EMS personnel that are responding in the rural area.
That's correct. Yes. So we have been, providing EMS training in various ways to the first response agencies to get them the continuing education.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kelly, do you have any questions?
Just one. Can you put the slide up that has the 4 options? And I noticed that on the blue one, it says reduce fire resources. Is that the only one of these 4 that reduces fire resources?
No, sorry, they all reduce fire resources. It's just that what I'm saying there is that even on that one, we continue to reduce fire resources. I didn't want to make it sound like we were bringing up everything, I guess. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
I got one other question. And maybe you don't have a breakdown on this, but how many of the EMS calls go on the KU campus, the dorms and stuff?
I don't have that right now, but we can definitely, that's stuff that we can get.
Do you think it's significant or not very much?
We deal with a lot of data. I don't know. I don't think
Okay.
I want to make an assumption on that.
All right.
Well, commissioners, one thing I want to make sure that you understand about the timing of these proposals and where we stand with the development of the proposed 2026 budget. I'm in a bit of a quandary because as I said, I view my role as charge given to me by the county commission is to prepare a balanced 2026 budget that maintains service levels and also maintains a flat mill levy. Without direction from you all, I don't propose a tax increase or a tax decrease. And I also generally try to follow all of our standing agreements. And so I'm in a difficult situation here because if we follow the existing governance agreement of 6436 based on those standards of cover, there will be a service decrease. So I'm sort of stuck between trying to get some direction from you all in terms of what I will propose, because if we stay with the 6436 and as outlined in the standards of cover and the governance agreement, there will be a reduction in service. So I don't need that direction today, although I'll take what I can get if we've got time for it. But, you know, my hope, what I'm probably going to have to do is make some professional judgment estimations about what I include in my proposed budget, and then we can discuss it as we review that with the commission. But I wanted to just be really crystal clear about the sort of challenge that I have before me.
Got a question of the total budget for fire and medical. What percentage of the total budget was the city reduction?
For which option?
Well, they wanted their budget to go down, what, $1.5 million?
$1.5 million, I believe.
$1.5 million?
Yeah. Is that what you were?
And what percentage was that of your current budget?
If you went back to your
Or what's the total budget?
35 million. Yep.
Current operating budget is around 29 million.
Okay.
And so it was a $2.6 million impact to LDCFM.
A $2.9 million operating budget, $29 million operating budget.
So I, first of all, want to recognize the difficult position that Sarah is in to try and, we have a variety of status quos that you're trying to fit into your budget recommendation, and none of which will fit reality in these scenarios. For my own part, I think that the need is strong. I think the case for the need is very strong for not only maintaining the EMS response that we have, but increasing that in in the near term, whenever that might be. But I also look at, the blue here, adding another 24/7 ambulance as being a certain tax increase on our part, which is a weird spot to be in for city residents that are, instead of having that impact at the city where we could maintain services, having that impact at the county level and having a different set of circumstances. That seems like an odd position to be in. But I would have a hard time justifying taking away medical response resources for Douglas County. That was not our intention starting into this. It's just, this is the situation we find ourselves in, of trying to maintain a shared governance agreement. I'm also not sure what the long-term implications, if we change that percentage, how do we ever get it back? Or are we just, carrying a larger share for a longer period of time? So that I'm not giving you real clear direction, but I just kind of wanted to talk to commissioners that I have a hard time justifying us decreasing service to, our citizens under these circumstances.
No, I think that's really helpful, and I appreciate some of that direction. And I would agree. Option blue there I don't anticipate we would be able to do that under a flat mill levy. I know enough about where we are right now that I don't see how I could do that without a tax increase.
The one thing I'm curious about is that, 40-hour-a-week ambulance, Medic 6, I imagine that also would require, many of these costs would still be here. I imagine that also would require a tax increase on our behalf. But I'd be curious to have those numbers. It still might be beyond what we can get to in the moment.
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Kelly.
Oh, sorry about that. So I first want to say I really appreciate LDCFM and staff's work to create some other scenarios. That's what we asked for. And this slide that you're showing right now is very helpful in that. So thank you for that. The gray box that's on here, it says minimize reduction of current EMS resources. Are we saying that the EMS resources that are being reduced is the shutdown of Engine 5?
Yes, because it's an ALS response unit that stops our times for the purposes of tracking call times.
So really the way that this is written, and the way that these four are framed, the only way not to reduce EMS resources is the blue box. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think where the intent is when we look at service levels, if we want to maintain the same service levels as 2020, it would probably require additional resources to meet the demand. Whether the commission wants to look at it from maintaining service levels or maintaining resources, those are probably two different conversations. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, Commissioner Kelly, what I would say is in a shared system, we can't just think about what the impact is on only EMS. So I think, the least reduction of EMS is on the blue option, but every option in here will impact EMS. But
I guess that's what I was sort of aiming at. Like, this is a shared cost, and some of the decisions that may be being made by our partners are impacting our EMS system. So, yeah, I understand why we do shared, but I think that's one of the challenges in this whole conversation is, understanding that the decisions that are made by one of the partners is going to impact the entire partnership.
Sarah, I got a question for you. Is there any state laws that describe either the county or first-class city requirements for EMS and fire?
The statutes for counties with EMS are permissive. They're not mandatory. So we don't have a statutory requirement to provide EMS. It is permissive. I would say almost every county in Kansas provides some sort of support for EMS.
I have your percentage. It is around 11 to 13% of a negative impact to our operating budget.
If I can tag along to Commissioner Kelly's comments there, we can choose an option that suits the county. But those are also kind of decisions that are involving the city. So like, we don't get to choose an option exactly. And so we don't have a real way of knowing, like, if we choose this option, will the city support that? I mean, they have their set of needs and we have our set of needs that we're looking at these things. And so that's the other kind of complicating factor for deciding what we are willing to pay for and what we want to see happen. Like a best case scenario for us may be not supported by the city.
Yeah, agreed. As we say all the time around here, collaboration is hard. So that's the situation we're in. Now, what I would say, and we also will be, I anticipate the commissioners will be done with their budget process before the city of Lawrence really even dives into their budget process more extensively. So these are the proposals that have been submitted to the city at this point in time. They have theirs and then these have been submitted to us. But what they do in their budget process, I mean, they may decide to ultimately raise taxes and not have any cuts. I mean, that's also in the realm of possibility. So, but from what I understand, and we have ongoing conversations with city leadership, that each of these scenarios meets the city's request for options put forward in the city manager's proposed budget.
Okay,
So
that's-
each of these meet their cut.
And so typically, I think how it's happened is we've set our dollar amount in our budget and the city has made whatever decisions that they're making, which at the time during our current governance agreement kind of made the decisions for the whole entity, regardless of our thoughts on it. And then we had to fit it within that dollar amount that we had set. Is that similarly what would happen here? Or are we, if we're looking at having a larger percentage of the cost, are we also going to have some more say in the direction for LDCFM?
Well, we have joint governance, and I'd say that as we continue to have those governance conversations, we're going to, I think we've made a lot of progress on our collaboration about governance in these, in terms of our partnership and our engagement in these decisions. But it's still two different governing bodies with two separate budgets. So I don't want to give the impression that I feel like particularly LDCFM staff and city leadership value my contributions and input into this process. That being said, I think what would happen is generally, this is the value of having decent fund balance reserves. If a change is made after the county adopts its 2026 budget, we are able then to accommodate those issues for a year. And then we would come back to the commissioners in terms of conversations for the next year's budget process. So let's say option, not even on here, rainbow, is that the city decides to go ahead and fund service level expansion for Station 6 and the staffing for it in the 2026 budget. We will have already made our decision, and we would have to then adjust and come up with what that would look like for the 2027 budget in terms of its impact on operations. I would say we're also communicating frequently about the status of the city's CIP related to Station 6. We included funding for our portion of Station 6 in our CIP for 2025. It remains. It's still there. But we did not include any operating funds because it was not approved by the city. So I think we would be, if option rainbow was put forward and the city decided to go ahead and raise taxes to pay for that expansion, we would need to adjust after the fact, but it would impact our 2027 budget. And normally that works out because of our shared percentages. And normally with a big capital project, you're doing the building first and then you're adding the staff as it comes on. So normally it works out just fine.
Thank you for that, Sarah. For the record, I do like option rainbow, as briefly presented. And, I guess I just want to reiterate what I think I've heard from other commissioners, and what I think I've communicated in previous meetings, a couple of things. One, and this is sort of top priority headline for me, is that a reduction in services is not really an acceptable answer to me. And specifically EMS services, since that is what the county is responsible for. Excuse me. But of course, given the shared governance and the fire and medical team and department that we have here and the way our services are integrated, a reduction to those services is it's just not really an option that I accept. And I feel frustrated by these options in particular because of, I'm very grateful for these options. Let me rewind and be sure that I'm clear about that. I'm really grateful for you all doing the work to come up with a variety of calculations that help give us more options instead of a binary option. So I do sincerely appreciate that. And to sort of reiterate what I've heard from other commissioners, to change the percentage in a pretty significant way prior to having had the opportunity to revisit, renegotiate, and recalibrate that shared governance agreement has been a frustrating part of this conversation for me. It is what it is, and it is where we are. And it's hard not to want to still acknowledge out loud that from my perspective, it was an avoidable position, and had other decisions been made by our partners at the city in the past. And so again, the headliner for me is that a reduction in services that's not something that I support in response to this. I don't appreciate the idea or like the idea of us having to potentially raise taxes from the county when the city has opted not to raise taxes in the past. And whether that happens this year remains to be seen, but that's not the trajectory that we're on. However, a reduction in services is not the answer to me. And so that sort of just re-illustrates the quandary that you're in, Sarah, and I recognize that. I think it is something for us on a long-term level to digest more and maybe unpack this part of the conversation more when we get to the renegotiating the shared governance. You know, obviously the amount of time that we're looking at, whether it's a 5-year plan, and so that gives us more time, more data, maybe the better ability to sort of predict or project long-range planning. That part of that conversation is, you know, really how we effectively talk about a change in service levels if and when we are one or both partners are faced with a budget crisis that might necessitate it, right? I mean, I think that that's ultimately, we didn't quite imagine this scenario and therefore didn't have a very clear path for how to address a significant shift in the percentage from one partner to another in order to avoid a crisis and decrease in services. And that's separate and aside from having just, you know, pressed pause out of necessity in this conversation, out of a totality of circumstances, pressed pause on this idea of really working towards and investing in the system expansion and the services expansion. And instead having a conversation about how to avoid or mitigate reductions. And that's just disappointing to me. And I appreciate all of the constant diligence that LDCFM leadership has put into continuing the conversation, really being responsive to the county commission and county administration, and asking some more questions and requesting a little bit more involvement in the process of thinking about a variety of options instead of just that binary set. So appreciate your work on that. Recognize it continues to be a hard discussion. And Sarah, I hope some of this feedback has been helpful for you as we move forward. And, you know, I will also commit to making a point to reach out to our partners and peers at the city to have conversations prior to our summer budget sessions with this additional information that you've provided us. So thank you again. Any further questions? Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Kelly.
Yeah, just one thought I want to make sure as I look at the gray option, One of the things that I'm thinking about is that the reduction in service and the change in the percentage is being dictated by decisions made at the city level. And all of these changes in the percentage are numbers that were backed into rather than applied. I would be sort of interested in, could we maintain the percentages so that I mean, I understand shutting down Engine 5 does impact EMS resources, but I wonder what would happen if the city could cover that 2.25% to maintain those percentages. So I just toss that out as we're continuing to work on this, because I do, like Commissioner Willie, sort of worry down the road and sort of what precedent does it set if one side of the partnership can decide, hey, I want to reduce it by this much, and that's going to throw off everyone's percentages. I think we've always honored the percentage that we had agreed to, even that when that required raising taxes. And I'm worried about starting setting a precedent of saying, hey, we don't want to pay that much, so we're going to change the percentages.
I appreciate that. I think that's something we can talk about. I already warned them there might be options 14, 15, 16, and 17 as we continue through this process.
And I also want to encourage us to have conversations with KU as well, right? I mean, because as we think about collaboration and some of the conversations that the county has not been in, most recently with the passing of the new special district with KU, and we were not involved in those conversations. And so we need to go back to the table and ensure that maybe some memorandums of understanding should be signed so that we ensure that some of these resources and services that are provided to either the hotels or the conferences or even to students that are actually utilizing your service, that we can actually recoup those costs and not just lose them. So the service that you all provide is valuable and it should be valued.
Commissioner Anderson is talking about like the incentives, when incentives come to us with a request, the main, we would call it utility that is provided by the county inside city limits would be your services through EMS. And so that's kind of been our main topic of conversation with those incentive packages that, especially through KU, that they've come asking for, is we want to make sure that you're in the conversation for the same reason that we're in the conversation of looking at what does that do to how we provide EMS service with a change of density, or how does that impact where we would put another station when that time comes, those kinds of conversations.
Okay. Any final questions for now for our LDCFM friends from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, thank you all again very much for your time and for your work. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure. And we are adjourned until our 5:30 business meeting.